Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we have a very special individual with us today. You may have seen him in a previous podcast, dropping the knowledge. Alhamdulillah. Myself and Tisnan have invited back again Sheikh Saleem Seedat from Blackburn, a very highly regarded individual in the community, within our youngsters. And today he's here to talk about a topic that's dear to his heart. Sheikh, Assalamu alaikum.
This video is sponsored by Chai Pani Blackburn, the hottest place to get your Karak chai in South Asian street foods. Open from early and closes late means you'll never miss out on all your favorite foods. With a great indoor seating area with friendly staff at your service, to a large shared car park with a drive-through style attendant taking your order, so you don't have to leave the comfort of your vehicle. It's a perfect spot to meet and catch up with friends, so make sure you head down to Chai Pani Blackburn in partnership with Brain Cell Squared.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you all?
Alhamdulillah, good, thank you. How are you?
Alhamdulillah.
Keeping well?
Yeah, as you know, it's been a bit of a difficult time. Past few months have been difficult for me, especially with my mother passing away. So it's not been a particularly easy time. So that's where we are at the moment.
Okay. I'm sorry to hear about your mother. May Allah grant her Jannah and forgive her sins. Ameen. Sheikh, me and Tisnan earlier, when we stood outside, Tisnan said something amazing, and it's so true. Young ulama and ulama that start off young and then grow up to be ulama and sheikhs and alims and muftis and stuff. He said, I'll let you say it, Tish.
What I've noticed is when people like yourself, other people that we know in the community that have educated themselves to be alim, mufti, sheikhs, so on and so forth, the hand they have, the hand in their life, that's the biggest guidance, is a mother.
Definitely.
So how would you describe your mother and how did she have an impact in your life?
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of like the whole upbringing primarily falls on one's mother. That the upbringing, the primary person who takes care of you as a child, even more than the father, is the mother. The mother takes care of the child in ways that the father can't. And that was the case in my case as well, in terms of what my mother did for us. In particular for myself, it was just, from even as young, in terms of obviously coming into this world is through your mother, and then after that, upbringing, preparing, feeding you, taking you to school, taking you to madrasa. If there's any issues at school, if there's any issues at madrasa, more than the father, you're more likely to discuss it with your mother.
I know I did.
And then your mother, that natural care that she has for you, the concern she has for you, and how she then takes it up for you, and at every stage tries to protect you. That's you can't buy that stuff, and that's irreplaceable. Once you've lost that, you've lost that kind of care. That's
irreplaceable.
It's just unparalleled. You can't replace that care, and especially when it came to my mother. My mother was the eldest of 11.
MashaAllah.
And therefore, not only did she bring us up, she brought up her siblings as well.
Yeah.
And along with bringing up her siblings, my mother was born in Malawi.
MashaAllah, my mother was as well.
Your mother was born in Malawi as well, yeah. So my mother was born in Malawi, so my grandparents had a shop. So she used to look after the shop, she used to look after the siblings whilst she was in Malawi. When they moved over to Britain, because they all had British passports, because they came through Malawi, they didn't come through the subcontinent, they came through Malawi, so they had British passports. So then they came here to Britain. And then when they came here, again, looking after the siblings, and then when she got married to my father, then bringing us up, and then not just bringing us up. Then when I had nieces, so when my sisters had daughters, looking after bringing my nieces up as well. So 3 generations of people.
SubhanAllah.
It's not just one generation, bringing up 3 generations of people.
It's like she was a mother for 3 times.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everyone. Yeah.
Absolutely. And with my mother, like something unique, you don't really get to see with people. I don't think I've ever seen this with anyone else. You won't find a single person, regardless of whether you met her for a minute or whether you've known her for a lifetime. You won't find a single person that has a bad word to say about her.
MashaAllah. Says a lot about the person's character as well then.
Of course. If you were to ask like 10 people about me, I'm sure you'll find like 2 people who've got something bad to say about me.
Probably not. But yeah, I see your point.
You see, you'll always find someone who's got, rightly or wrongly, they've got something bad to say about you. But for my mom,
SubhanAllah,
Alhamdulillah, you won't find a single person. You can ask anyone that knows my mom, who's met my mom for a minute or who's known my mother for a lifetime. Not a single person you'll find. Wow,
and that in itself as well is reward in the akhirah as well. So even though your mother's not here now, still the good words that she's left behind that people are saying, that's reward as well.
It said that the people are shuhada, the witnesses for the akhirah, the witnesses, so that it's like their testimony of this person.
Yeah. MashaAllah. Mothers are unparalleled. And there's a reason why in Islam, even just childbirth, we can't repay back.
Without a doubt.
No.
Without a
and
doubt.
now, if we put on top of just that, we've got raising the child and then all the issues that the mother comes across, fixing for the child, the feeding, the cleaning after, everything top to bottom, from the start to the end. You just can't. You just can't fathom how you're gonna repay a person just for this.
Definitely.
I know you've got a million things that you love about you, that you used to love about your mum. One thing that sticks with you from as long as you can remember to when you were a kid before she passed away, what's one of the most memorable things that you've experienced with your mum?
There's her selflessness. I think there's 2 things I'd like to talk about, but the main thing is her selflessness. Like, it's unparalleled. I've never seen like that level of selflessness. It's just rare in the world. And that's why people remember her, because it's just her sacrifice. Until the end, she was like. I remember sitting with her the night before she passed away. She had the hemorrhage. The night before she had the brain hemorrhage, and then she was in hospital for 10 days after the brain hemorrhage. So the last time I spoke to her was the night before she had the brain hemorrhage. And she was saying to me, I sat next to her on her bed, and she said to me, I'm worried about Dad. That's my last conversation. That's my last conversation with her. I'm worried about Dad.
Even on her deathbed, she's thinking about all this.
Right till the end. That was the last conversation I had with her, and then in the morning after Fajr, she had her brain hemorrhage, and after that she obviously didn't regain consciousness. But yeah, that was my last conversation with her.
How are you holding up within yourself?
It's probably the past 6 months probably been the most difficult time of my life.
It's like the woman that's been constant in your life. You're everything. You grew up with the woman. You know everything. She did everything for you, and then one day, gone.
They say that about mothers, right? A mother is the, and you were saying this before, innit? Go on, I'll let you say it.
So the mother is the boy's oldest boy's first true love.
Definitely.
Because everything else is come and go, unconditional love. There's no like malice in the heart.
Unconditionally. Again, I know that from not personal, but family situations as well. No matter what the son does, the entire family can hate the son. But the mother will always be there, sending food or doing something.
True.
You know?
May Allah grant it Jannah. That's all we can ask for.
I was speaking to a colleague at work earlier this week, And she said to me, like, mothers are special, like they're the bedrock of society.
100%.
Without mothers,
No.
like, what's society?
It's true. It's true.
Yeah, 100% correct.
The men are the ones hunt, go and build and do this and do. Who teaches the youth? Women.
Yeah.
Women. Mothers are the ones that raise the next generation.
Yeah. I don't know.
No, it's true what you say, Tisnan, that the mother, behind every great scholar, not even scholar, every great slave of Allah, majority of the time, there's always a mother that's superb,
Yeah.
in the eyes of Allah.
Definitely, there's no doubt about that. The first thing, so her selflessness was unrivaled, and you can speak to anyone that knew my mother and they'll say the same thing, like just sacrifice. Her whole life's just sacrifice from the start till the end. As I mentioned, even the last conversation, she's worried about my dad, even though she...
If you don't want me to ask, how's your dad dealing with
my dad's struggling,
Is he?
definitely, he's,
Yeah,
and it's
he's-
understandable. When you
course.
spent nearly half a century together with someone, then
You're going to feel
just-
it. You're going to feel it.
May Allah give him ease.
and he's obviously bedbound. So my mother was the healthier parent.
Okay.
Alright.
So my dad's bedbound. So my mother at least had some mobility.
Yeah.
And then suddenly having a brain hemorrhage. So it was completely unexpected. And that's, I think, death is difficult to deal with as it is. Bereavement is difficult to deal with as it is. But when it happens all of a sudden, then there's
Unexpected,
that,
then it's... Yeah, I see what you mean. It's like with, obviously, when you have and I'm sure we've all been through this as well, when you have a family member or someone close to you that's, okay, they're ill, they're not well, maybe Allah's going to give them another couple of years or something, and then maybe they're going to go. But if it happens, you prepare for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely.
But when it just happens all of a sudden, it's just that, I didn't even think about this. Like, what do I do? I need to,
And I've experienced that twice. Once, my grandfather, my granddad, when obviously we knew that he had problems, he had cancer and stuff, and it slowly kept deteriorating. We realized, doctor said, it is what it is now, that's it. You prepare for it mentally.
Yes.
That's why I don't think it affects a lot of people that much, because you're prepared for it, like, it's gonna go, because same with my grandma, same thing happened, we were prepared for it. Alhamdulillah, we got that chance.
Yeah. Same with my grandma as well. Like, she had Parkinson's, and then it just got progressed really bad. But prepared, like we all had that chance to prepare. But then obviously with another member of the family that passed away, it was all of a sudden. So you can see the differences between the two.
Huge difference. Also, I wanted to mention about my mother that along with her selflessness, it was like her self-respect. Like, she had a lot of self-respect. So if she was in some context, obviously as human beings, at some stage in your life, you're going to be disrespected by someone.
Of course.
She would just she would teach me, there were situations in my life where something happened where I was like disrespected in a particular context, and then I came home and either myself or my father or someone else informed my mother that this had happened with someone else. My mother just turned around and she just said, this is, next time you go, I'm going to give you the money. If you want to buy sweets or anything, use this money. Don't ask that person again for sweets in the future. Just told you self-respect.
Yeah,
On the outside, no, you don't do that.
Yeah.
And that was my mother. So on one hand, she had that selflessness, but she also had that self-respect. Someone disrespects you, it doesn't mean my mother would get into conflict with someone, but what she would do is she would distance herself. So she would say, no, this is not acceptable.
Yeah.
Maintain your dignity in this context. And that's another lesson.
And that's very
stuck with me.
Yeah, that's
from a young age. As a kid, when that incident happened, I remember my mother turned around and said, no, it's not acceptable. I said, don't do this in the future. If you need that, I'll give you the money. You just get whatever you need from the shop. End of story.
Sheikh, if it was one piece of advice, so obviously women in Islam, right? If you, I know you can't speak on behalf of your mother, but you know your mother better than anyone. If your mom, if you could think of any advice that your mother would give to the women of today, the young daughters of today, the young wives of today, the young mothers of today, what do you think your mother would say to them, living in this day and age?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I have to try and get into the mind of my mother and think about what my mother would say. Yeah, that's a tough one.
We can revisit. We'll revisit.
That's a tough one.
I feel like that's a beneficial answer for the young women.
But the one thing my mother is very proud of being a mother. Very proud of being a mother. Definitely. And I think we in society, because we live in a capitalist society, we have to put a price to things for them to be valued. And that's why, for example, like feminist economists, they speak about this. They go, why is it that the work that's done in the home, how come that's not accounted for in the calculation of the GDP?
Okay.
Why is that's one of the criticisms of feminist economists, that why is the work that's done domestically, how come that is not included within the market?
Still work.
Because it's bringing value to society. Yeah, it's not.
But is it a physical value? As in, is it an economic value?
So this is the issue. So how we value things in a capitalist society, how you value things, the effect of that, the consequence of that is we devalue motherhood as a result of that.
Yeah, true.
And that's a problem.
Yeah.
Because if mothers, as I was mentioning earlier, a colleague mentioned that mothers are bedrock of society. If that is then devalued, then what does that do to society? That devalues motherhood. What's the consequence of that? What does it do to society? And I think we're seeing some of that, aren't we?
Yeah.
In the world that we live in, where we devalue motherhood, then we see the consequences of that in society. This is, I think, a difference as well between the first generation and the second generation. Something I've spoken about with people privately is the difference between the first generation and the second generation. Like if we look at our parents and what they did when they came to this country, the sacrifice they made, our parents, our grandparents, the sacrifice they made, they set up the infrastructure so that we can then benefit from that and reap the fruits of their labor.
Yes.
And that's their contribution to our community.
For example, like the masjids.
Yeah, great example. So for example, the masjids, that whole infrastructure has been set up by the first generation. Now the question is with the second generation, our generation, is that what's our contribution going to be for our community?
So whether
for our deen.
Is it maintaining what they started? Is it starting something else?
What is that contribution? Because it seems that all we seem to be doing is that we've got caught up in the rat race.
I was just going to say the same. Yeah.
We've got caught up in the rat race, and our priority is plague Lamak beardwood. That's our priority.
Yeah.
What's our contribution to our community? What's our contribution to the deen? So that's something that we, the second generation in particular, need to reflect on. That when we ask that question, it's a provocative question, what's our contribution? Because the first generation, we clearly can speak about their contribution. Why is it that we can't answer that question? What is our contribution to our community and to the deen, we can't even answer that question.
Thinking about it, it's true.
It's
What have
not
we done in the past
really,
20 plus years?
I'm just thinking about myself.
Yeah.
Right? I'm just thinking about
Of
myself
course,
right
yeah,
now.
of course,
yeah.
of course.
And if I put myself into the words of what you have just said, Sheikh, what's my contribution to my
Literally.
community apart from all of this kind of stuff? What is my contribution to my community? As
It's
a
a heavy
the
thing to
second,
hold over, yeah.
maybe
It's very
third.
heavy, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
When we think of it like
Yeah.
that, it's a
Because there's a documentary out where a brother in Bradford, when he first moved from Pakistan to the UK, he moved to Bradford, I think, or whatever, or Rochdale, I think. He was the first man to build a masjid in either Rochdale or Bradford, I'm not sure. Because Muslims were coming over, but there was nowhere to pray. So he was the first one that built the mosque in the community. So he was like a cornerstone of the first generation
Yeah, he
that
started.
came over.
Yeah.
They started something.
I feel like the new generation, the next generation, whether you're second or you're third, the next generation from the generation that's built these infrastructures within our communities, for them people, what our one thing, it could be anything, you've got any other points, fair enough, but the one thing that we should try and aim for is maintaining what they've built. I'm going to stick with the masjids. You might have different examples as well, but with the masjids, for example, if the youngsters get involved in the masjid, I'm speaking to myself first as well, if the youngsters get into looking after the masjids, even something as simple as we should go and clean up the masjid every now and then, go into the masjid. I'm not going to get into the whole committee thing, but you speak to the imam, is there anything that I need to do? Lights changing, this, that, whatever, something. Build that foundation, build a connection with your local masjid. And if enough of us do that, that's maintenance. And we're holding strong to what they've built for us. What Allah has allowed our parents to build for us in our communities, we're reaping the benefits, like you said. But what we're going to do, just take the benefits and not do anything?
So maintenance is important, but along with maintenance, there's another problem, and that problem is replication. So what we're doing is, so there's already like 50 masajid or so in Blackburn. Yeah. So what we're doing is, sometimes obviously when you go into a new area, it might become necessary to build another masjid. That's understandable. That's absolutely fine. But what we seem to be doing is replicating what the first generation did.
Yeah.
So there's just replication. So we just copy and we just replicate it. Whether that replication is necessary or not, we don't even ask that question. We just replicate things. So if there's a madrasa, we just build another madrasa. Whether it's bringing benefit or not, we don't even question that.
No. Yeah.
But for whatever reason, we just replicate. And we don't consider what the needs are of the community today. Because the needs of the community at the time of first generation were different from the needs of today.
Yeah.
And that is not being appreciated by our generation. That we're not thinking about the changing needs of the community, and therefore we're not catering for their needs.
Yeah.
That's fundamentally the problem with our generation.
Without naming any names,
Of course.
and any street names and stuff.
Of course.
There's a masjid. Big main road. Yeah. And you probably know what I'm talking about already, but there's a masjid. Big main road. There's a masjid there. I'd say not even 200 meters, there's another one being built. Bigger and more grander. And now I've always questioned this, because I've always thought to myself, there's masjids around Blackburn, Accrington, Burnley, Preston, wherever. Roofs are falling down and they're having to scrape for money and asking on every Jummah, spare some money, lillah, and we can get the roof done or this and that. I remember someone, I was at Jummah once, and a mosque. One of the people from the mosque from a different town came to our mosque, saying that, look, we don't have no money, and the mosque that I was at had money, and they came to that mosque and they asked and why I say the roof, because I can remember this, and they said, look, our roof is leaking really badly, and it's going to cost us like 50 grand to get, the masjid is big and it's going to cost quite a lot. However much it was, whatever you can spare, fair enough. Why do we need to build another masjid 200 meters down the road when, if you want to, you can take a portion, let's say that masjid is going to cost 2 million to build. You can save yourself that 2 million, take 500 grand out and distribute. If you really are passionate about getting that hasanat, getting that reward of building a masjid, distribute that. And somehow, however, the logistics you can sort out, but distribute that money around to the masjids that need fixing up, or into the youth centres or the Islamic youth centres and stuff like that. There's no need to build another masjid because it becomes a rival. That's what I'm seeing it as.
So we engage in replication, and you've just given an example of replication there, and many a time this replication takes place because fundamentally our intentions are correct.
Yeah.
That's what it ultimately comes down to.
I'm just going to say to you, is it because of the ego and all that stuff?
So we have to reflect, each and every one of us has to reflect on our spiritual state. That when we do a good deed, whether that deed is an individual deed or whether that deed is a deed for the community, a collective deed, at every stage we have to reflect on our intention. Why are we doing this? What's the purpose of this? Because if one's intention is sound, then one keeps the gharad, the purpose in mind. If your intention is sound, you keep the gharad and the purpose in mind. When your intention isn't sound, then it doesn't matter whether you're fulfilling a purpose or not.
Yeah.
So that's a sign that your intentions aren't correct, when we don't think about the purpose of what you're doing.
Right.
So what's the purpose of building another masjid when there's countless other needs that the community has that are being overlooked?
Yeah. I mean, I just said one need, but yeah, like you said, there's so many other needs that need, and everything costs money nowadays.
Of course.
Everything costs money.
Yeah.
What you said there, Sheikh, brings to me straight. Is it the story of the people of Ad or Thamud? They were building grand, carving out of the caves and the mountains to show off, and they weren't even living there. And it's crazy how that 5, 6, 7, however many thousand years ago, still happening today, but now it's happening with the Muslims. Because I'm not here to judge anyone's intention, but
Quran mentions in وَتَنْحِتُونَ مِنَ الْجِبَالِ بُيُوتًا. They used to carve out houses from the mountains.
Allah knew His creation, that's the thing.
yeah, communities, I think, what's another point about communities that we need to understand, especially when it comes to our parents within communities?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So care of parents is a very pertinent subject, especially for our generation. And why it's pertinent for our subject is because we are at crossroads. And we are at crossroads between Western values and Eastern values. That's the crossroads we are. Because all of us, to some extent or another, is westernized. Yet, at the same time, because of our background and where our parents and grandparents came from, are also have a foot in the East. And if you were to generalize about Western culture in contrast to Eastern culture, then what Western culture prides itself by is its individualism.
Okay.
The individual matters most.
Yeah, that's so true.
And that's something that a person in the West who has no connection with the East, no background in the East like us, will even admit That individualism is something that they pride themselves by.
100%.
So it's not something that's derogatory per se. It's something that practically everyone will acknowledge, that individualism is what they pride themselves by. Whereas in the East, what you see is collectivism. Generally speaking, collectivist culture is dominant in the East, and that's the history of the East. Obviously, because of westernization and globalization, that's changing by all means, and we acknowledge that. But if you look at the history, then Eastern culture is generally collectivist and Western culture is individualist.
An example of each? So
like when it comes to family,
okay,
do we find that connection with extended family in the West in the same way that you find in the East?
Not at all.
Why? Because the East is about collectivist culture,
Yeah.
the West is about individualist culture.
That's so true.
So that's a good example
And
to
sorry to cut you-
demonstrate that difference.
Sorry to cut you off, but you see that in your own family members as well.
Of course.
Like when my parents talk about being back home, they didn't talk about brother and sister and mum and dad. They spoke about aunties, uncles, brothers,
neighbours.
yeah, all together as a community. Here we don't have that, unfortunately now.
It's true.
So what we have is both influences. We have Western influences because we've been born here and brought up here, but we also have Eastern influences, and that's our background. So now we have to somehow deal with that tension. There's a conflict within us. Within each of us, there's a conflict. And we have to try and find a synthesis now. So that may not look the same as it looked for our parents or grandparents, but we have to grapple with that.
Yeah.
Of how do we make sense of that tension that exists between individualist culture and collectivist culture.
Yeah.
Because as it stands, we just conforming more and more to the dominant culture.
Do you think that is good, that we are able to have a balance between the two, or do you think we should be aiming to go towards one side, meaning the individualists or?
Yeah, that's a really important question. So what we have to understand is, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, have you studied Maslow's hierarchy of needs in school?
Never.
Why is it that my generation, like practically everyone, we studied like Maslow's hierarchy of needs in school?
I'll tell you what it is. We didn't listen. Fair enough. But Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that was just like in school all the time. Was that the case with you, Rafi, as well? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, yeah? Okay. So, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the top of so there's 5 layers, and at the top of it was self-actualization. Okay. Actualizing oneself. That was at the top of what we were taught in school. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the version of Maslow's hierarchy of needs that we were taught in school, the height of the hierarchy of needs was self-actualization. However, what we find in later versions of Maslow, because Maslow then amended his hierarchy of needs towards the end of his life. I was going to say, is Maslow still alive? He's not?
No. Okay. But Abraham Maslow, towards the end of his life, amended the hierarchy of needs and added an additional layer beyond self-actualization. And he said that was self-transcendence. Okay. So it's not about the self, rather there is a human need to transcend the self. To go beyond the self. No, to go beyond the self.
Okay,
So, a human being cannot be happy by merely just looking after one's selfish needs.
True. Okay.
One has to go beyond the self and look after others, and that others may be fellow human beings, or it may be transcending makhluk and the creation and looking after the creator and transcending creation, but one has to go beyond themselves to be able to reach the pinnacle of fulfilling one's needs.
Subhanallah, that just reminded me, and you know, this is amazing. I'm getting like, you know, the hair standing up, because Allah talks about this in the Quran. I don't know the exact verses, but I've studied Surah Yusuf, and the father of Yusuf alayhi salam, when he was struggling, when Yusuf alayhi salam was taken away from him, and one of the ways that he, when I was looking into the tafsir of it, the ustad that I was learning off said that one of the ways that the father of Yusuf alayhi salam coped, not the only, but one of the ways, was by advising his sons, and that's one of the way where he could help himself, where he was, because he was a prophet himself as well. So he was advising his sons as well around that time, which helped him, and that's exactly what you're talking about. So, and why my hairs are standing up is because everything that the modern world is discovering when it comes to theologic and all this kind of stuff, Allah, if we look into the Quran, it's all there for us.
Yeah. So what collectivist culture, going back to where we're discussing the difference between Eastern culture and Western culture, collectivist culture by definition includes selflessness. Individualist culture is about the self. So where's the selflessness?
Selfish.
In individualism? And that's the tension, because we can't reach the pinnacle of the hierarchy of needs, to use the framework of Maslow, without that selflessness. And therefore collectivist culture is integral for us to have community that is healthy and thriving. If we want community, then we need collectivist culture, and a human being can't work in the long term without community.
100%.
So therefore we need to focus on that selflessness, on nurturing that selflessness.
So you're saying that we need to bring back our Eastern values.
Absolutely. When it comes to community, the importance of community. Now there are some tensions in that. So let's start to interrogate that. Why is it that when it comes to community, we at times get put off? What is it about community that puts us off? Because we have to be honest.
I think, okay.
Because if it's just easy, community is right, focusing on the individual is wrong, then we would just go for community. Like, why is it that something stops us from doing community? So we have to interrogate that, because there's something not right there. So we have to interrogate that. So what stops us from doing community? What is it about community that puts us off? We have to be honest with ourselves, because that's part of the conversation.
If I'm talking about myself,
yes,
one of the reasons why I've been put off from the community is because gossip, and you know like when you're in the community and then you become a part of the community. That's one of the reasons I've slightly moved out of the community in terms of my living situation, because I don't want to be part of that everyone knows everyone's business, and it can be a good thing that everyone knows everyone's business, but it can also be a bad thing, and I've seen the bad thing of it. I've seen the bad side of it. So that's just, it's like PTSD almost. Like, I'm moving away. I don't want to deal with this.
So this is precisely the problem. I'm glad you've articulated that, because this is precisely the problem. That if we want to do community successfully, there's certain usul, there's certain principles, there's certain adab, there's certain etiquettes that we have to keep in mind for that community to work. And if we don't live up to that, then community breaks down and people become individualistic.
I think they've lost that now. You know, our generation.
Yes.
They've lost. Not saying everyone. You can't paint everyone with the same brush, but majority of our age people have just separated themselves from the community, because when they try something good towards the community, they don't get anything
They
back.
get shut down.
Yeah, and if you give something good, you're expecting something of someone.
Like basically, right? There's this. I won't go into detail, but there's this new case. We'll call it a case. New case. Someone that I know, they're battling. They're trying to say to their person of parents and in-laws that they're trying to give them the Islam side of everything, and the parents are just bringing out the culture side and the community side, and they're having a big clash at this very moment.
Yeah, so that clash between culture and a very letter of the law approach to Islam, that clash is something we're going to explore further, inshallah, as we go into the discussion about care for parents, because that will that will demonstrate through example how we can navigate that tension. But that definitely there's a tension there, and it's not as simple as either or, because we as human beings live in a culture, and therefore culture has a role to play as well. Even in fiqh, like urf has a role to play, custom has a role to play, culture has a role to play. So you can't ignore culture. So there's this idea among some Muslims of our generation that we can ignore culture and just do Islam. Culture's bad, Islam's good. That's a very simplistic approach, because you can't ignore culture. We live in a culture. So custom, you can't ignore custom, you can't ignore culture. To what extent we allow culture, that's a matter of debate and discussion, and that's something we can explore as well further in the podcast through the example of looking after one's parents. But that's something that we as a community now need to grapple with, because the first generation, they understood culture. The second generation is becoming very literalist and trying to make out that culture is a bad thing. There's a notion there in our generation that culture is bad, religion is good, without realizing that religion is not always against culture, and culture is also a consideration
they do go
when it
hand
comes
in hand
to
sometimes.
Yes,
I think I fall into that category.
Yes.
I do as well. No, I'm not going to lie.
Feel like I do, because when, for example, if in a family gathering, in my head, it's like, if it's not against the Sunnah and the Quran, culture-wise, do it, whatever. That's my mentality. And sometimes I say in a bad tone towards certain people that I shouldn't. That makes them feel like I'm lecturing them or I'm putting them down. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, you're wrong.
Like, it's culture is culture, Islam, keep separate. You know, and I don't. I know it's wrong.
Like that notion is quite dominant in our generation.
It's good that we've got someone here that can, because I struggle with that as well.
Absolutely.
I struggle with that as well. I'd like to explore that, because that's now thinking in my head.
Yes.
You said in the previous podcast that culture and Islam in some ways can go hand in hand. I struggle with that. To not separate the two. I struggle with blending the two. I have no problem separating. And then Tisan, you as well.
100%.
What could you say to us that would?
Yeah, so that requires a podcast in and of itself. But what we can do is we wanted to discuss, because of the context of this podcast, we wanted to discuss care for parents and the duty of care that we have towards our parents. So we wanted to discuss that, birrul walidain, as it's known Islamically, being good to one's parents. So we wanted to discuss that, and that as an example, if we use that as an example to explore the subject of how culture and religion can be applied in the context of care for parents.
Okay.
Then inshallah that would be good way of dealing with that subject.
Right.
So, okay, if we look in our community, you have the younger generation, let's start with the older generation. You have the first and some maybe second that are close to the first as well, generations that are very in touch with their culture.
Yes.
When it comes to parents. And then now you have their children that are now slightly moving away from that idea and moving towards just thinking very, what's the word that you used?
Individualistic.
When it comes to Islam. So
very literal.
Literal,
Yeah.
very literal when it comes to Islam. Now, okay, here's a hypothetical example, right? Let's say there's a parent that's whose son or daughter has gotten married and has just had a child, for example. Now let's say the parent wants their child and their grandchild to come over to stay, but then the parents, the new parents, the youngsters are saying Islam doesn't say any of this, so I don't have to, give me my own space. But then the grandparents are now, yeah, but it's culture, so you should come over and stay, and then there's a massive clash going on there.
Absolutely.
I'm not asking you to like diagnose the whole issue, but is that like, what am I touching around the same?
Yeah. You're along the right lines. This is the kind of thing we need to grapple with. So what we've got a tension here. You've got individualist culture of where the relationship between the family and extended family and the individual is different to a collectivist culture. So there's I think a Letterman interview. David Letterman, old interviewer David Letterman, and someone's just taken a segment out and put it on YouTube, and I came across it a few years ago. So David Letterman interview with the Bollywood actress Aishwarya Rai, Amitabh Bachchan's daughter-in-law.
I've seen that.
Yeah. So Aishwarya Rai. So now Hindu culture obviously is another, like Indian is part of Indian culture. Indian culture is again collectivist culture. Now they may do their collectivism different to Islam, and that's something we may discuss as well later on in the podcast. But it's still collectivist culture. So Aishwarya, the Letterman was having doing an interview, Aishwarya Rai, and the question came up about living with one's in-laws. So and one's parents and in-laws. So Aishwarya Rai said, I live with my in-laws. So they go, well, even at this age, very Western thing to say, isn't it? Even at this age. So Aishwarya Rai, being Aishwarya Rai, like this is something I do find different between Indians and even many Muslims. I do see this difference between Hindus and Muslims, and that my theory is it's down to economics, because India's economy is stronger than British economy. It's ahead of British economy, Indian's economy.
All right.
Yeah, it's surpassed
You wouldn't think
Britain's economy. Yes, that's where we are at the moment. So it's surpassed Britain's economy. So what happens is when you have the when you're thriving economically, when you're progressing economically, it creates a confidence among the people. So they're able to assert their culture in ways who don't have the economic power. And Muslims countries tend to not have that economic power. So they're less able to assert themselves. So what she said as an Indian woman is that when she was challenged, oh, you still live with your parents. So she turned around and said, at least I don't have to take an appointment with my parents before I meet them.
True.
Which is...
Yeah.
It
makes sense to us.
To assert her collectivist Hindu culture, even in an interview in the West. She's able to assert. How many Muslims would you see being able to assert their culture in the same way? Let's be honest with ourselves. How many Muslims would end up being given a platform to be able to assert themselves in that way?
Not many.
There's a difference, isn't there?
Of course.
culturally there's a difference. I would put that difference down to economic progress, because that gives them that confidence. So for example, even in cricket, whatever the Indians say go, because without India there is no cricket.
True. The biggest fan base is in India is hands down.
So Pakistan doesn't have that
authority.
No. Bangladesh doesn't have that authority. India has the authority because it's just economics, isn't it? True. That's what it comes down to. So it's economic power.
So if we're talking care for parents within our communities, what would you say the best way is to for our community, our youngsters in our community to move towards looking after their parents in this day and age?
So when it comes to Birrul Walidain and being good to parents and caring for one's parents, in order to understand the role that plays within our deen, within our religion, we first need to understand Islam holistically. Because if we don't understand Islam holistically, we can't understand the role of and the importance of looking after one's parents. So first we have to take a step back and understand Islam holistically. Now, when we speak about Islam, typically the first thing that comes to mind are certain acts of worship, such as salah, praying, or Sawm, fasting in Ramadan, or Hajj and Umrah. That's the kind of thing that primarily comes to our mind. So our understanding of Islam is reductionist, and therefore we don't fully appreciate what Islam is. And therefore what the ulama have done is explained Islam and mentioned that there are 5 spheres of life that Islam has guidance about. So by all means, Islam has guidance about aqaid, beliefs, and ibadat. There are 2 areas where Islam does have guidance and does have teachings, but Islam is not restricted to them. Islam is not restricted to beliefs, Islam is not restricted to worship. Rather, Islam goes beyond that. And therefore there are other areas of life regarding which Islam has guidance about. So Islam also has guidance about akhlaq, character. So when it comes to character, we have a very simplistic understanding of character. But again, when it comes to character, there's halal and there's haram. And we have to understand what the halal of character is, what the haram of character is. So when we have conversations about halal and haram, it'll be about some matter of fiqh, so some item of food, or something about moon sighting, or something about milad or something. So our discussions oftentimes about Islam descend into a conversation about fiqh, and not just fiqh, but also a matter of fiqh which is debated among the ulama. So that's what usually happens. So that's how reductionist our understanding of Islam is. So therefore we need to take a step back and holistically appreciate Islam, because the debates that exist in fiqh, similar debates exist when it comes to the development of one's character. Ulama have written about what's good in one's character, what's bad in one's character, and the debates that exist about that, because it's not clear cut. These things aren't clear cut. So for example, on one hand, Islam teaches us to have tawadu, to have humility. So first we need to understand what humility means. Because nowadays, you look at the comment section on YouTube, and there's random influencers are referred to as humble. So people are very quick to call someone humble.
True.
You must have experienced that online. So what is humility? So Islam actually has a definition about what humility is, like it has a definition about what kibr and arrogance is. So we have to first understand what these terms mean, and also then there's tensions within these terms. So for example, on one hand, Islam teaches us to have humility, but on the other hand, Islam also teaches us to have izzatun nafs, self-respect. So how do we how do we adopt a synthesis between, on one hand, having humility and self-respect, because it seems contradictory? How can you have self-respect and have humility? There's a tension there. So we have to settle that tension. So things like that require knowledge, but we don't have discussions about that. How many people do we find, how many Muslims do we find that have discussions about this?
Even
develop the understanding.
Even like when the elders get together on Eid and stuff, there's always one topic that, you know, they talk about. There's
Absolutely.
only certain things.
Absolutely.
No one, I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about, like, when was the last time we actually sat and talked about character?
Absolutely.
It's the last thing on anyone's mind.
Yeah, because everyone thinks they're perfect.
Yeah.
A very important point. So the modern human being, the starting point of the modern human being is that by default we're good. So I'm good. Now, the moment you think I'm good, where's your spiritual development going to come from? The spiritual development only starts when we acknowledge now I'm Marif.
And I think that's
I'm not well.
That's one of the biggest problems within our community.
Of course.
Because the reason why these conversations are not happening with our, not just elders, but with in gatherings, in family gatherings and stuff, because we're all scared to see what's going to be uncovered within ourselves.
Absolutely.
So if there's a conversation about ego, one person might be sat there thinking, I don't like this conversation because now it's talking
Too
about
close
me.
to home.
Yeah.
So one thing we find is you go to the masjid and the imam speaks about something. There's a tendency, especially if people are from people are middle class, so especially typically this is very true of middle class people, and obviously we have a growing middle class Muslim community. So this is very true of middle class people more than even working class people. So middle class people, when the imam speaks, whatever the imam says, they say, oh, he's targeting me in the khutbah. Is that what the person attending the khutbah should be thinking?
No.
The person attending the khutbah should be thinking, actually, the imam should be, like whatever the imam is saying, I should be applying it to myself. So rather than taking it personally and getting offended by it, actually, the intention should be, I'm attending the khutbah, so I get an opportunity to reflect on myself and to better myself.
Yeah.
So if the imam says something, I should be applying it to myself. That's the whole point of the khutbah.
Yeah, of course.
Definitely.
Not be offended by what the imam is saying.
Yeah.
Says
But
more
you
about
see
you.
the modern mindset.
So when it comes to the parents then, so when it comes to caring for the parents,
Yes.
You mentioned the first 2 points.
So you've got, continuing on with the 5 spheres regarding which Islam has guidance about, you obviously have aqaid and ibadat, you have beliefs and worship, but you also have guidance about akhlaq. That's another sphere of Islam that Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam have taught us about. Akhlaq, character. The 4th sphere is mu'amalat, so our dealings. So a person's dealing with another person, especially financial dealings, transactions that take place between two human beings. So Islam also has guidance about that. So there again, like when we think about business, we don't, so earning a livelihood and business, we don't generally think about how Islam applies in that context. So when we in the workplace, we don't think about my interaction with the other person and how Islamic that is. It's as though we can do our ibadat, we can perform our umrah, and we can be very diligent about that. But the moment we come into the workplace, we suspend that, and then there's a different person that engages in business and in the workplace. Because we don't see Islam extending to the workplace. We don't see how Islam's applied in that context. So that's a reductionist approach that we have when it comes to Islam, and that then affects us because then there's so much guidance of Islam we're not applying in our lives.
Yeah, that's that. So I essentially what you're saying is belief and the ibadat that's a given. You have to do that. Anyway.
That's there.
That's a given.
That's
You
part of
have to
Islam.
do it. That's part of Islam.
That's part of Islam.
But the parts that we're overlooking, because
Absolutely.
we're focusing, which rightly sure we should be focusing so much on belief and worship as well, but we're overlooking character. We're overlooking the dealings, like you said. So there's another one that you said.
And then the last area of Islam regarding which there's guidance is mu'ashara, community. And this is where birrul walidain sits. It sits under mu'ashara. It sits under community. That looking after one's parents falls under community. That's very full, because it's about our relationship with community. That's what mu'ashara is about. So it's not our relationships with each other individually. It's our relationships with the community. That's what mu'ashara is about.
Essentially, what you've shown us here is basically you've shown us, and this is just for the benefit of the viewers, you've shown us that how important these three other points are.
Absolutely.
And especially the last one, which because it's a topic today,
Of course.
the looking after your parents.
Yes.
That is so important that ulama have categorized it as part of one of the five guidance points.
So we have to. So birrul walidain falls under mu'ashara. So it falls under community, and then within that, birrul walidain has like a elevated status.
Okay.
So in the Quran, for example, in Surah Al-Isra, Surah Bani Israel, it's mentioned وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, that your Lord has decreed that you do not worship anyone except Him, and you be good to parents. And be good to your parents. Allah has decreed that. So along with mentioning Tawheed and worshipping Allah alone, Allah has mentioned being good to one's parents. And as the commentators have mentioned, this shows and emphasizes the importance of being good to one's parents. Because it's been mentioned
directly straight after
Tawheed. So that's an example of where in the Quran and in the Sunnah, birrul walidain, being good to one's parents, has been emphasized. And therefore ulama in the past have written books about it. Imam Bukhari has a book about just this subject. So obviously his Sahih is famous. His book, after the Book of Allah, his Sahih is the most famous.
Yeah.
But he also has other books, and among them is a book specifically about birrul walidain, being good to one's parents. That's what the book is titled, birrul walidain. That's the title of the book. And similarly, his book on Al-Adab al-Mufrad, there again, if you go through the first few, like a significant proportion of it at the start, it starts with birrul walidain.
Okay.
Being good to one's parents, and then there's tens of chapters just on birrul walidain. That's how the book starts.
It's a very big part of our deen.
Absolutely.
It's like the foundation of it, because obviously, looking after your parents is, the way I see this is, if we're putting aside an Islamic duty, right? If we put that bit aside, and if we're just looking at a dunya sense, any good human would, if for example I did something for you, any good human would say, and I'll do the same back for you, or similar. Our parents, if we put aside the Islamic duties and everything, our parents have done so much for us. When they get older, it's only right that we do the same, if not more, back.
Absolutely. Of course.
As that, and I'm just looking at as a dunya sense, like as a not as a
normal
Muslim
guy,
sense, just a normal guy, whether it's a non-Muslim, white, black, Chinese, Asian, whatever. Anyone should have this kind of mentality.
Of course.
My parents have helped me throughout the years from until I was able to sort of everything on my own, 16, 18, whatever. I should only now do that back to them now that they're older. Absolutely. I should be helping them.
Absolutely.
It's only right as a human.
Absolutely. So there's an emphasis on birrul walidain. Now, what we have is, you have that emphasis on one hand. So then, let's interrogate that further. So like we did when it came to community, why do we have a problem with doing community? And we discussed that earlier. Why do we have a problem when it comes to looking after our parents? Let's interrogate that. So why do we have a problem looking after our parents? Let's interrogate that.
So I'd say, if I was looking into the mind of a young person today, between 18 and 25, I would say that their issue towards not being there for their parents and having tiffs and whatever, does a lot of it fall back to having different mindsets between them. So
Can I say, just ask a question, basically it's like
Go
a
for
question. So my granddad, he told me this one thing that I still remember to this day. He goes, however you treat your parents, your children will treat you the same way.
Very good point.
So like, as a kid, I never understood that. Now that I'm older, however my father was with my granddad, I'm the same with my father.
Yeah.
And it's like you realize, obviously I know it's not the point, but it just came to my mind, like, is that an actual thing?
Yeah. So this is because people learn through example, don't they? So one of the things I saw my father do is look after his mother. And I saw that until the end. As a kid, I used to be there with my dad, go to the hospital. I saw that as a kid. And that inevitably is going to have an impact on you.
yeah, it's embedded
Because you've
in
seen
you.
it.
Yeah,
You've seen it with your own eyes that this is what my dad did, this is what my parents did, and therefore you're going to follow suit, aren't you?
Yeah.
So without a doubt, that's how human beings learn. Human beings learn more through example than they do through speech.
Yeah.
You can tell people 100
As much
things,
as you
they're not
want,
going to
yeah.
listen to you.
No,
But through example, people learn. When you practice something,
Through
people
example,
learn
yeah.
through that
Right.
example, don't they?
But also that's a valid point as well, that obviously parents haven't taught it to them because they've just left them and do what you want kind of thing. But also what I would feel is, if I'm thinking about it, if we're talking about the interrogation side of it, that a lot of it becomes that they're not agreeing on points.
Yeah.
And these are points where they both parents and youngsters have to say, we're never going to agree because we're both from different
Absolutely.
eras.
Of course.
But we have to find a common middle ground.
So what we've got is we've got parents coming from Eastern culture, which is a collectivist culture. You've got children coming from Western culture, which is an individualist culture. And therefore, how can you reconcile the two? You can't reconcile the two. It's not possible to reconcile the two. So what you have to then do is try and find a happy medium. And that's where the problem is. So the problem with our generation looking after parents, many a time, is the expectations that parents may have of their children. So what's the relationship? So Islamically, what's the relationship between a father and their children and their child, their son, their daughter? What's the relationship Islamically? Is that a relationship of two autonomous individuals who have responsibilities towards each other? So every person is responsible for themselves, but we have responsibility towards each other. Islamically, there's hukuk, there's rights. Or are the parents owners of the children? You see, are parents owners of the children Islamically, or parents and children are autonomous individuals who both have hukuk and rights towards each other?
Second one.
Yeah,
It's the
honestly,
second one,
yeah,
isn't
of course,
it?
of course.
That's significant culturally, isn't it? Because culturally, the notion is parents own the child.
Yeah.
This is the problem.
That's in 100%.
Do you see the
I
problem?
think you have to give and take between parents and
So if your starting point is parents own the children, how are children going to react to that?
true.
They're never gonna.
It's not going to work, is it? The
rebellious,
relationship's not going to
No,
work.
no, no.
Because that's your starting point. So Islamically, this is very important to understand. That parents don't own their children. Parents have certain rights and children have certain rights. and there's a responsibility of birrul walidain specifically on the children, which needs to be understood and emphasized. That you have to be good towards your parents, you have to care for your parents. There's a specific responsibility that children have towards the parents. So there's a hierarchy there.
Of course.
That in society the parents are superior to the children. There's a hierarchy there, but that hierarchy is not absolute. It's not absolute ownership over the children.
Exactly.
There's a difference.
Yeah.
Children are still autonomous individuals.
Because I've heard very cultural parents say to their children, you shouldn't talk to me like that. I'm your father, I'm your parent, which is true. But if a parent is wrong, and they've said something wrong or done something wrong, and you as a young adult, 18 to 25, maybe even 30, you should, like you say in hukuk, you should have a right. That one of the rights is saying, no mum, no dad, that's not the right way of doing it. And now, as a parent, the parent should say, khalas, no, that's true, I did wrong there.
Yeah, so this is where it gets complicated. So Islamically, another thing which ulama have written about is that when it comes to hukuk, rights, when we talk about rights of parents, there's 3 kinds of rights in Islam. So you've got hukukullah, rights of Allah, which we're familiar with. Then you have hukukul ibad, rights of the servants or rights of human beings or rights of others. Yeah, so you've got rights of others. So when we talk about birrul walidain and being good to parents, or hukukul walidain, the rights of the parents falls under hukukul ibad, rights of the servants. That's what it falls under Islamically. But our understanding is more often than not reduced to this: the hukukullah, hukukul ibad. And therefore hukukul walidain, rights of the parents, fall under hukukul ibad, rights of others. And therefore the only time that you don't listen to your parents is when it contradicts the rights of Allah. Then there is no obedience. La ta'ata li makhluq fi ma'siyati al-khaliq. There's no obedience to the creation in the disobedience of the creator. So that's the only time that you don't listen to parents, otherwise you have to listen to your parents. It's a very simplistic understanding of Islam. That's generally the understanding, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you have hukukullah, rights of Allah, rights of the servants, in particular in this context, rights of parents. Rights of parents, you have to obey your parents unless it contradicts the rights of Allah. That's it. Khalas. Finished. Very simplistic understanding that people have. However, ulama, especially the ulama who have written extensively and dealt with the nuances of these issues, specifically them ulama have explained that you also have hukukun nafs, rights of the self. And where do they get that idea from? From a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he says, inna li nafsika alayka haqqa. Indeed, yourself has a right over you. So you have to balance these 3 kinds of hukuk: rights of Allah, rights of the servants, in this context rights of the parents, and then rights of the self. You can't ignore rights of the self. And the problem occurs, the reason why people get put off many a time from looking after their parents is because their hukuk aren't being looked after in the process.
Yeah.
That's what puts them off. And that's the danger of collectivist culture. That a collectivist culture overlooks the rights of the self as opposed to the individualist culture, which overemphasizes the rights of the self.
It's a balance, isn't it?
You've got to have a balance between them all,
Yes.
you're right.
So this is the issue. So you have to, when people don't practice Islam, you don't tell them to practice Islam.
Sure.
You try and understand why they're not practicing Islam. What's stopping them? What are the barriers?
Right.
And you interrogate them barriers and say, okay, that's the barrier. Okay, how do we understand that differently? How can we change our perspective on that? So if we have a problem with care for parents, we don't just say, oh, care for your parents. Rather, we try and understand why people are not doing it.
Yeah.
Do you see?
And
that's
essentially that's what we've just done,
approach.
because how you've structured that is that doesn't just cover the example that I give, but it covers all sorts of different examples. Whereas, for example, parents choosing favourites when they were younger, which means when they're older, the non-favourite to say doesn't want nothing to do with the parents, kind of thing. So that also falls under the rights for desire, rights for your own self. So a lot of the issues could be sorted, plainly speaking, or could be sorted if this third category was thought of.
Yes.
Not thought of. It was
Factored in.
Factored in. Yeah.
Absolutely.
If we go slightly into hukukun nafs, then, what does that actually entail?
Yeah.
Is that just rights for yourself as a parent or as a child?
Okay. So let's apply it to this context of parents. But how is hukukun nafs relevant? So the idea is obedience to parents is absolute, pretty much, unless it contradicts the rights of Allah. That's the popular notion and understanding that Muslims have, generally speaking. The average Muslim, their understanding is you can't disobey your parents unless they're telling you to disobey Allah. Simple. However, it's not as simple as that. The ulama who've written and explored the nuances of this subject, they've mentioned that you have to factor in hukukun nafs. Therefore, not only is hukukul ibad, and in this context hukukul walidain, circumscribed by the rights of Allah, but they also circumscribed by the rights of the self. So the rights of the self put limits on the rights of the parents. So when you say obedience to parents, you have to obey your parents. What the ulama who have dealt with this subject in depth and with exploring the nuances, what they've said is that the hukukun nafs have to be factored in, and therefore obedience to parents is only applicable when there's a threat to one's own life or to the threat and the well-being of the life of the parents. So for example, when it comes to khidmah of the parents, so you have a duty Islamically to do khidmah of your parents and to make provisions for the khidmah of your parents, to look after your parents, to serve your parents. Anything that interferes with that is wrong. That's an obligation upon you. But beyond that, not everything is obligatory. So if your parents tell you to divorce your wife, is that obligatory?
No, of course not.
So if we said that obeying your parents, the only thing that can put limits on it is the rights of Allah, then how do we explain this issue? How do we explain this case of when your parents tell you to divorce your wife? Then we would have to say, if we apply that principle to the logical conclusion, then you have to divorce your wife. So why are we saying that in that context it's not obligatory to divorce your wife? Why are we saying that? Because hukukun nafs.
No, it's more, man.
Do you see?
Yeah.
This is a deeper understanding of the subject, isn't it? It's not the what I refer to as pop Islam. Pop Islam is rights of parents. Yeah, you have to obey your parents unless they tell you to do something which is disobeying Allah. That's pop Islam.
It's deeper than that.
It's much deeper than that. I've explored. And the ulama who are muhaqqiqeen, who are experts in this field, explore these nuances. They tell you that, there's much more to it than meets the eye. So we have to raise our level of knowledge.
This is where the Salafis fall short, because they obviously they cut out many years of scholars. And if they were to, like you said, pop Islam, they'd go right back to Quran and Sunnah, and they derive everything themselves, and they've had,
but in this case, it's not just the Salafiyya, generally, Muslims in general, when it comes to this subject, don't have a proper understanding of the nuances.
That's what I mean, that obviously, who were the ones that, this isn't in Quran and Sunnah, this is derived from the understanding that ulama over the years have built.
Absolutely. So it shows the value of tradition.
So it shows the value of thing.
Yeah, of course.
Tradition is good, just depending on how it's applied and where it's applied.
Yes. So like where obedience to parents, I think we've covered that well, haven't we?
Because that is, you've brought a new
framework to the picture. Like.
New
It's
topic.
like, people don't think outside the box.
Yeah,
They
you
don't
have to think holistically
Yeah,
about
man.
Islam. If you don't understand that there's 5 spheres of Islam,
Yeah.
and then within that you've got like these hukuk, rights, and there's 3 kinds of rights, and then you have to find a balance between these rights.
them, and then
Unless you don't understand that framework, you're fighting over particulars without understanding the spirit of Islam.
Yeah.
This is the spirit of Islam. This is understanding the spirit. When you understand the spirit, then the particulars make sense within that context.
This particular topic when it comes to parents, because we're all, and we have a young audience, anyways, and some of the young audience are becoming parents. What are the things that they should be looking out for within themselves, that right, okay, this is what I need to take from this podcast and apply it, because I'm going to be a parent soon or in the future, and I don't want to make the mistakes that the previous generations have done. Like you said, character, always improving on your character, always building your own character.
Yeah. So the danger now is that because of the Western influence, we're focusing on the nuclear family. And we're forgetting the extended family, whilst Islam has guidance about the extended family as well. So the moment you get married, you focus on your spouse and you focus on your children. Everything else is secondary. Whilst Islamically you have rights towards others, that includes your parents. And that individualism is becoming dominant. And therefore we need to reconnect with that collectivism that we get because of our Eastern background.
Yeah.
We need to reconnect with that collectivism. But reconnect with that collectivism whilst understanding that there's these 3 kind of hukuk. So not forgetting hukuk al-nafs in the process. By all means, understanding that Islam teaches us the importance of looking after your own rights, but not at the expense of the rights of the parents.
Not neglecting.
Neglecting your parents.
And it's true. And it's not like a lot of the youngsters would turn around and say, yeah, well, our culture has been wrong and look where it's taken us. Well, in fact, one of the positives that have come out of our culture, the Eastern side of it all, is look at how the West treat their parents in old age, and look at how the East treat their parents in old age.
It's clearly a difference,
2
isn't
completely
there?
differences. Which one's better? We know which one's better.
Yes.
The world knows which one's better.
Yes.
So we can clearly see that
There's a difference.
there's a difference, and one's a negative difference and one's a positive. So if anyone's obviously watching this saying, yeah, but why do we need to go back to the Eastern way of things?
Yeah.
Because there are certain positives that we can take from it. You don't hate your culture completely.
Unfortunately, you'll be seeing this a lot more, where the Eastern side of our culture is moving away from it, and we're going towards the English Western ways, where we're seeing more stuff. We're seeing more Muslim parents, older parents, in care homes.
Yes, exactly. That's the logical conclusion.
Because they bring in the
of individualism, isn't it?
I used to be a delivery driver and deliver parcels at certain places, right? Majority of the time, it's all 99% is all white people, right? Non-Muslims.
Yes.
But then there's one time, it's still in my heart. I still picture that lady's face. She's there by herself, and she's speaking Urdu, and I'm asking, just walking past. She goes, "Now, what are you doing here?" She goes, "Oh, my son dropped me off. He's not picked me back up yet. She's got dementia, I think, and he just left her there because he's got dementia." And it's like, yeah, there are some people are like
genuinely
that.
need help. I get
It's
that.
just sad.
I like. Okay, see, with me, I understand that if you come from a household financially, you're really struggling, and then obviously you have a parent, you need help. Everyone needs help. I get that. And what are your thoughts on exactly what you said?
Very good question. Very good question. So this is another misconception. When you personally caring for parents, your life changes, without doubt. Your life changes. That's one thing. And the other thing is you start to connect with people who have also experienced that themselves, or are experiencing it. So you connect with other carers, and then the conversations that take place with the community of carers opens up another world for you. So until you're not in that position, it's very difficult to empathize
100%.
with how. But once you're in that world, then you start to talk to people, and there's so many people in that situation. Then you start to learn about what the experiences are of carers.
Yeah.
That's when you start to learn. So things I didn't appreciate 2 years ago, I'm now appreciating because I'm in that position.
Yeah.
That's the point I'm making. That sometimes you don't, because we have blind spots, don't we, as human beings?
Yeah.
Of course.
So because you're not put in that situation, more often than not, that's going to be your blind spot.
Yeah. Because you've never thought about it.
You never thought
had to
about
pay
it.
any attention to it.
Exactly. You've had the privilege not to think
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
it. But once you put in that situation, you no longer have that privilege. You have to think about it. And then you also connect with people who are also going through that. So then you understand things. So in these conversations, you start to understand things. So another problem, another misconception, another problem why people are reluctant to care for their parents is because they think that they physically themselves in all circumstances must look after their parents.
That's unfortunately my view of when my parents get older. That's what I would.
So everything falls on your shoulders. Yeah. Whereas Islamically, that's not the case. So Islamically, what Islam teaches you is that you do that binafsihi, you do khidmah of your parents, khidmatul walidain, binafsihi yourself, or as the text, for example, al-Bada'i, Bada'i al-Sana'i is a Hanafi text, Ghasani, just in case you've got some viewers who have a deeper understanding of fiqh, they may want to see these references. Bada'i al-Sana'i mentions this, that you either do the khidmah of your parents binafsihi yourself, or bil ajir, or you hire someone to do it. So to do it yourself is not always obligatory. You can also get the support of carers.
So would that mean care homes, or would that mean bringing into the home?
Bringing carers into the home.
Into the home.
Because putting your parents into a care home more often than not is going to neglect their rights. So bringing in carers into the home, so social care is very important.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Social care is, and alhamdulillah, still in this country we have access to social care. Alhamdulillah, that's a ni'mah, that's a bounty we have. So we should benefit from that.
Yeah.
So having carers visit your home a number of times during the day, that's important. Where there is still a problem when it comes to care is more often than not, care is not provided for the night. So you still have to then have the people that, so when I speak to other carers, the good practice is that the families that do this the best are those who have a rota for the nights. So when I've spoken to carers,
between themselves,
work amongst themselves. That's the best approach. So they share the nights amongst themselves. So when I've spoken to people in the community, the people that have made it work really well, the good practice is that they share that responsibility amongst the siblings, and therefore they take turns, and they have a rota in place for the nights. So it's usually care is a combination of you yourself physically caring for your parents,
as well as
and also bringing
outside
in
help
care.
as well, bringing it in.
I like, obviously not just me, but a lot of people that are watching this may think like me and feel like, obviously you've explained it better, so now I understand it. But before this, I would be like, no, I wouldn't call anyone in, I'll just be there myself. But then now you've spoken and said those things, that you're allowed to bring other help in, because end of the day, you have a life, you have responsibility elsewhere.
Comes back to hukuk al-nafs we were
There you go.
discussing earlier.
You know what I mean? So if no one's learned anything, I've learned something. You know what I mean?
So that again, so that's another thing that stops us from caring for one's parents. So again, if we have a better understanding of our tradition and of fiqh, then we can understand that not everything has to be done by yourself physically. You can bring in the support.
So
as well.
I guess that's a good lesson for young parents or young people that are soon to be parents, or that are soon to find themselves in a position where their parents are going to need and require help. You're allowed to go out and get that extra help. There's no requirement on you to do everything 100% physically yourself.
Absolutely. Now, continuing on from that, there's another problem that we have in the community. So when you speak to other carers, this is another thing that we culturally deal with. So another issue is when it comes to looking after your parents, is that responsibility solely on the male children, or is that responsibility also fall on the female children as well?
So, from experience,
Good.
I don't know who the responsibility falls under mostly, which you're here to answer that. But from experience, I've always seen the daughters doing the most work. The daughters are always the ones going back, even though they're out of the family because they're married into a different family. You know, they're always coming back looking after their parents. Whereas the sons are still helping, but not as much.
Okay. What's your experience, Stan? What are your thoughts on this?
For me, I'd say for a father, the son should look after him.
Should. Yeah.
And if it's a mum, the daughter should look after, because obviously women have different.
But what if the daughter is married?
If she's able to, if she can get out of a situation or whatever she's in.
What happens in the community? If she's married, what happens in the community?
Community would say you look after your side, your new family.
Yeah.
You stick to all of that.
Good.
They wouldn't.
Good. This is what I'm getting at. So the moment a woman gets married, it's assumed in our culture that she no longer has any responsibilities towards the parents.
Mm.
Where do we get that from?
Culture.
Culture. But what culture do we come from?
Oh,
Indian culture.
Hinduism,
Indian culture.
India.
Indian culture, Indian subcontinent culture, because Pakistan, Bangladesh, historically, all part of India. So our culture is like shared in that regard. So that subcontinent culture that we have, because the form, so there's a difference here in the collectivism. So Hindu culture and Muslim culture are both collectivist cultures because they come from the East, but there are obviously differences. So in Hindu culture, the way they approach it is that you get married and then you have responsibilities. The daughter then has responsibilities towards their in-laws after they're married. So that's how they structure their society, how they structure their community. That's how they do it. Now, Islamically, what do we say? Now, this is coming back to like this tension between culture and Islam. So when it comes to looking after your in-laws, what do we say? Our generation, what do we say of more literate Muslims? What do we say about a daughter-in-law's responsibility towards their in-laws?
She has no responsibility at all.
Absolutely. So in Hindu culture, what happens is you don't take the responsibility of your own parents when you get married. You then take on the responsibility of your in-laws and you treat them as your parents. That's what happens in Hindu culture. So that's one collectivist approach.
Completely on that side.
Yeah. Collective. Yeah. In our culture, what we're doing is we're taking that part that you don't have any responsibility towards your parents once you get married, but neither do you have any responsibility towards your in-laws. So it's like, what are you doing then?
Chilling. Just enjoying your life now, aren't you?
Do you see the problem?
Yeah.
So on one hand, we're taking part culture, but then we're taking...
So it's almost as if...
best of both worlds.
So I'll take what's good for me. I'll take what's good for me, and whatever I'm not happy with. Well.
So culturally, the Hindu model can work as well, culturally speaking, Islamically, what Islam has to say is when you have the Quran, when the ayat of the Quran, the verses of the Quran and the ahadith, the traditions of the Prophet ﷺ, do they make a distinction between, when it comes to birrul walidain, being good to one's parents, do they make a distinction between male children and female children?
I don't think so, no.
They don't make a distinction. Where's the distinction in the Quran and hadith between male children and female children? There is no distinction between male children and female children in the Quran and hadith. Similarly, when we go into the fiqh, so because predominantly where we live in Blackburn, predominantly most people follow the Hanafi fiqh, like they do across the world. So in the Hanafi fiqh, there's a text called Al-Bahr al-Ra'iq. It's a sharh. is a commentary of a primer. So in that text, Al-Bahr Ra'iq, the author quotes وَلَوْ كَانَ أَبُوهَا زِمْنًا مَثَلًا, that if her father is disabled, for example, they may be bedbound. Yeah. So if they, for example, are bedbound, وَلَوْ كَانَ أَبُوهَا زِمْنًا مَثَلًا وَهُوَ يَحْتَاجُ إِلَى خِدْمَتِهَا, and he is in need of her care. He is in need of her care. وَهُوَ يَحْتَاجُ إِلَى خِدْمَتِهَا وَالزَّوْجُ يَمْنَعُهَا عَنْ تَعَاهُدِهِ, and the husband stops her from attending to the father. The husband stops her from attending to the father. وَالزَّوْجُ يَمْنَعُهَا عَنْ تَعَاهُدِهِ فَعَلَيْهَا أَنْ تَعْصِيَ, then it is obligatory upon her to disobey the husband.
Because of the rights of the parents.
Yes. فَعَلَيْهَا أَنْ تَعْصِيَ وَلَوْ مُسْلِمًا كَانَ الْأَبُ أَوْ كَافِرًا, regardless of whether the father is a Muslim or not.
Yes. That's just put a lot into
So
perspective.
you've got a clash between the rights of the husband, the rights of the father. The rights of the father take precedence.
Yeah. So,
So
alhamdulillah.
that's another misconception that we have. That it's only the son's responsibility.
Fair.
So
That's
it's-
what,
it's-
because
it's-
obviously, as I thought, like obviously, as a male, like father, for example, I think he would be more comfortable. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying what my thought process is. That if my father would be more comfortable with me looking after him, bathing him, stuff that male
good.
kind of thing.
Very good.
But then,
Yeah, so that needs to be taken into consideration as well.
Like
Yeah.
this.
So if you're sharing the responsibilities,
yeah,
there's certain things that daughters will do for the mother
Yeah.
that the sons can't do,
Yeah.
and there'll be
Vice
certain
versa.
things that the sons will do for the father that the
hence
daughters
the
can't do.
joints.
So obviously all
Yeah,
them things are to be considered. You
yeah.
can't ignore that.
yeah,
But that doesn't mean that you just focused on, that doesn't mean you don't share the responsibilities.
right.
What about nafaqah? What about financially looking after your parents? So when it comes to financially looking after your parents,
So now this falls under inheritance slightly.
not necessarily.
Because
No,
well-
it doesn't fall under inheritance, because it's about financially looking after your parents whilst your parents are alive.
So no, as in not under inheritance, but this is like similar to what I would think as how inheritance rules. Because inheritance, the son gets a bigger portion. Why? Because he has bigger responsibilities. So financially, this would be a responsibility on him financially as a son for his parents.
That's another misconception.
Oh.
So another text, a Hanafi text, Al-Mukhtar, is a primer, and then the famous sharh of it is Al-Ikhtiyar li Ta'lil al-Mukhtar, is the sharh, the commentary of it. Al-Mukhtar mentions Nafaqatul Aba wal Ajdad, financially providing for one's parents and for one's grandparents, not just parents, grandparents, Ajdad, yeah, grandparents, is alal awlad, is upon the children, al-dhukur wal-inath, male and female children. Financially looking after one's parents if they're in need.
Right.
So they mentioned
yeah.
if they're not in need, then it's fine. But if they're in need,
Then
both male
yeah.
and female children have a duty to financially provide.
See, we're not taught this.
Yes.
This way of looking at, put culture aside for a second,
Yes.
but as English people that are born here, raised here, we weren't taught that this angle of the responsibilities of children,
Yes.
not boy or girl,
Yes.
children.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
If we were taught that, we'd have all of a different mindset towards parents.
So as long as the woman is earning, which in our case is more relevant,
Yeah.
then she also has a responsibility
So what
of
if she,
looking after
what
parents.
if she isn't earning?
If she isn't earning, then the ruling's different. So
Oh, right, okay. That's
the
different.
fuqaha have gone into
Right,
that.
okay, that's right.
But if she is earning, then
And she has her
also
own money
has-
and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, no, fair
Then
enough.
she
Okay,
also has a
yes.
responsibility. Now, there's another thing we need to explore. When it comes to ibadah, so we're going back to our the earlier, like the holistic understanding of Islam and the guidance Islam has regarding 5 spheres of life. So going back to that, so this is another way that our reductionist approach expresses itself in our practice of the deen. So when it comes to ibadat, we focus on nafal, don't we? Like the more religious you get, the more likely you're going to focus on fulfilling your sunnah muakkada, your nawafil, and then when it comes to hajj, doing nafal hajj, doing umrah every year nafal. So there's like this emphasis on the nafal. So when Laylatul Bara'ah comes, then you worshipping in the night, even though that's not obligatory, you're worshipping in the night. Similarly, you doing your Taraweeh, beyond Taraweeh, you doing tahajjud during Ramadan, fasting, even fasting, people like fast 3 days a month, again nafal. So when it comes to ibadat, there's like an emphasis on nafal. That's things which are not obligatory but praiseworthy. We try and do them, don't we?
Yeah. Okay.
We try and do that when it comes to ibadah.
Yeah.
So why is it that we become minimalist when it comes to mu'ashara? So for example, looking after your in-laws. It's not obligatory in Islam to look after your in-laws, but then we adopt a very minimalist approach.
Well,
Yeah.
if it's not thinking, I'm not.
I don't have to do, if it's not first, I don't have to do it. Why not think about, no, I'll get a reward if I do it.
Because we do that nafil in everything else.
In ibadah we do it.
So
We
why
think
don't
about
do
nafal
this?
there.
Yeah.
So we're not thinking about nafal here.
Yeah.
We're not thinking about something which is praiseworthy here, the mustahab here. That is good to look after your in-laws.
Yeah.
It's not haram to look after your in-laws, is it?
No,
It's good to look after your in-laws.
Yeah.
So why don't you see the nafal in that?
I think
Where
we
does
pick
that
and
mindset come
choose.
from? Yes.
That's what it is. We pick and choose.
Selective.
Yes.
Very
Yeah.
selective, isn't it?
Very selective and very reductionist. So
Yeah.
we want to understand Islam as long as it doesn't go against our ego and our selfish self. And when it does go against yourself, your nafs, then we don't want to do Islam in that way. So there's that problem as well. There's a spiritual problem there as well, isn't there?
Because
There's a spiritual problem.
there's benefit in it, there's reward in it, and it eases the pressure on your, in my case, my wife. If I'm there to help out with her, as long as I'm not neglecting my parents,
Of course.
and looking after her parents completely, and not neglecting my parents or more, whatever. But I see what you mean, that we focus on our nafil a lot, right?
In ibadah.
In ibadah, but then so that goes back to the 5 guidance points.
5 spheres of life.
Yeah, so there's nafils in all of them.
Absolutely.
There's nafils in. So the
Absolutely.
first 2, the ibadah and the worship, we there's nafils in there that we fulfill because we're getting religious and we want to get close to Allah.
Yes.
But then the other ones, there's nafils in them that we don't touch.
We don't think about the nafal or the mustahabbat in other areas of life, the
Yes.
praiseworthy things in other areas of life.
even like our characters, like just in our character as well.
Absolutely.
There's in certain situations, I know Islam says you can strike someone with the same force that someone striked you, but if someone strikes you and you don't strike them back and you leave that, isn't that even a bigger reward?
Absolutely.
So that's an nafil there as well.
Of course.
But
So that's again, we take a very reductionist approach
Yeah.
to these things. Then what happens is, okay, so you saying you don't have to look after your in-laws, that's fine. So why is it that you put your children with your grandparents so they look after your children? So they don't have to do that either.
exactly.
They don't have to do that either. Are they obliged to do that?
No, of course not.
If
But they want to.
Yeah, they want to.
Yeah.
And also, you want them to.
Yeah.
So then you don't think about further then
Yeah,
that it's not obligatory upon your grandparents. I'm not going to leave my children with my grandparents because it's not further upon them to look after my children.
Yeah.
No. Then it's because it's in your interests. Then you put your children.
Yeah. You pick and choose, I guess,
Yeah.
what you think. But
Whatever serves your interests.
what I was thinking is as well, our parents from back home, from Pakistan, India, wherever, Bangladesh, they grew up being told, pray Salah, you fast, you do Hajj, you do Umrah. and that's it.
And you're a good Muslim.
You're a good Muslim.
Absolutely.
But then obviously there's more. Islam is on a tangent where you learn stuff as you go along.
Absolutely.
And there's more in-depth situations that, like we're talking about parents now. I would never have thought that there's so much going on within that one topic.
Exactly, because we're too busy discussing moon sighting and milad.
Yeah,
That's the problem of the ummah.
Yeah.
That we reduce Islam to a few particulars which are a matter of debate. You can go either way. It's a matter of debate, But no, we want to emphasize that.
Everyone becomes a mufti at that point.
Absolutely.
Everyone becomes a mufti at that point.
At the expense of this.
Yeah.
Now, if that's not Shaitan's plot, then I don't know what Shaitan's plot is.
Why is it that we're not a mufti when it comes to learning about the rights of our parents?
Absolutely.
Or,
Absolutely.
certain things like that.
Absolutely.
So that's a very good point.
Honestly.
Which is relevant to everyone. Whether you do Mawlid or not, doesn't really matter. No one says it's obligatory.
If you want
At
to
the most,
if you want to do it, do it. If you don't, whatever. That's a matter of the big ulama that let
them deal with it, and you follow the ulama you trust.
Exactly. Whereas the things that we can debate, the things that we can change within ourselves, why don't we debate them?
Absolutely.
Like we can change our character, we can change the way we act, our the things that we do on a daily basis for people, and all that kind of stuff.
But I feel like it goes with character as well, because the people you hang around with, like if we were sat here talking, we would have never learnt that from you or anyone else. Do you know what I mean? It depending on who you are around. Company, like last time we were speaking about company.
This is where company becomes
relevant. That's
relevant.
what I'm saying. It's relevant, like you teaching us stuff that we, inshallah, one day we pass on to someone else. That this is not just how it works. You're supposed to do this, that, and that.
Yeah.
We all learn something. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. So it comes back to that. I think that's a good note to close on. That the importance of company, it comes back to that, doesn't it? That we need to enjoy the company of those who are more knowledgeable than us and who we see to be more spiritual than us, so that we can benefit from them and improve our Islam.
Of course,
it's a forever climbing thingy, because we aren't very knowledgeable, so we're going to be in the company of someone that we think is. They have that same approach.
Absolutely.
They have
Absolutely.
that. So you're always getting, and so alhamdulillah,
there's no end to
there's
that
no end
progress.
to that.
Knowledge is endless, isn't it?
Of course.
That's
MashaAllah. So I think, Sheikh, thank you, and Rafi as well. Thank you for coming down.
Yeah.
Jazakallah khair.
Teaching us a lot.
Teaching us this.
Yeah,
this is a lot that
we
you
wouldn't
taught us
have
about.
thought of such things. So, from me, I appreciate you coming down.
Jazakallah khair.
You're welcome.
And inshallah, the next topic will be just as good.
Inshallah.
Subhanallah bihamdihi subhanaka wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.